Welcome to the East Bay's best podcast, The Capstone Conversation. This is a show that interviews political, government, and community leaders in Alameda, Contra Costa, and Solano counties. We look at what is going on in your city, how are we developing things economically, and where are we going from here? I'm your host, Jared Ash. Thanks everybody for listening. My wife and I are doing a costume drive to help homeless kids in shelters right here in Contra Costa County. The costume drive will benefit about 80 kids at Shelter Inc. here in the Concord area. So we're asking if all of our listeners can go ahead and purchase a costume. They're between $20 and $25. Online. You can see it in the show notes. We have an Amazon wish list that you could purchase from. I'll put in the show notes the Amazon link and more information via our Instagram account. If you can go on and grab it there, that would be great. I'll also post it to Jared Ash on LinkedIn. If you're not already following me there, it'll be with this episode. So if you could please do that, we need to get this wrapped up in the next week or so we have enough costumes for all the kids for Halloween. Thank you so much for listening. Hit subscribe, and thank you for donating in advance to this costume drive and helping our community. That's what this podcast is about. It's about helping out people in the East Bay. And if we're really successful at this, maybe we could make this a much larger effort in years to come. This is our second year doing this. Thank you for donating. All right, welcome to the Capstone Conversation. I'm your host, Jared Ash. I'm joined by Tim Haile, the head of the Contra Costa Transit Authority, otherwise known as CCTA. And today we're going to be talking about the future of transportation. We won't solve all your transit problems today, especially the commute down Ignacio Valley Road. But we're going to look at where transportation is going.
Well, yeah, thank you, Jared. And first, appreciate you having me on the podcast. This is a lot of fun. Yeah, and like I said, I'm Tim Haile, or like Jared said, I'm Tim Haile. I'm the Executive Director at Contra Costa Transportation Authority. And I got to make sure I get that right because it can get kind of confusing because we have a transit operator called Central Contra Costa Transit Authority. And we laugh about this all the time because there's always confusion. Like I get emails from that'll be representative of triple CTA. And then the other GM will get emails from two CTAs. So we always refer to ourselves as triple CTA and two CTA. But anyways,
you should start. What is CCTA, right? Let's get to a basic thing. What is your jurisdiction? What is your responsibility?
Yeah, no, I think, yeah. So Contra Costa Transportation Authority is actually a voter approved agency here in Contra Costa County. So we were created by a 0.5%, which is 0.5% sales tax here in Contra Costa County. So we were created in 1988 with the first measure, which was Measure C. And now we closed out that measure. And I'm happy to say that we delivered all of our commitments as part of that measure. And then there was a renewal of that in 2004 called Measure J, which is our current measure that we're currently operating off of. And that measure generates about $2.7 billion over the life of the measure. So it's a 25-year measure. It sunsets in 2034. And what we do is we use those sales tax dollars to fund programs. For example, if you live in the La Miranda area or the San Ramon Danville area, we provide funding for all the school bus programs in those subregions. We also provide funding for transit, local transit operators here in Contra Costa County. We also provide funding for educational programs like Street Smarts. And that's an assembly program where we go into all 260 schools in Contra Costa County and teach kids how to walk safely and ride their bike safely across roads and intersections. And then we also build large capital projects. And so a lot of people think the work that's being done in Contra Costa County is usually Caltrans, which is the Department of Transportation here in California. But But all the improvements that you've seen, major capital improvements you've seen, like for example, the fourth bore of the Caldecott Tunnel, the modernization of Highway 4 all the way out to Brentwood, that was a $1.2 billion investment using Measure J funds and Measure C funds. And then all the improvements you've seen on 680, the express lanes, the widenings, the intersection improvements. And so we also provide 18% of our revenues go to local jurisdictions for roadway paving, to fix potholes, to fix intersections, fix roadways. And over the last 10 years, CTA has leveraged about $1.4 billion in local sales tax revenue to build $5.6 billion of total transportation improvements in Contra Costa County. And so that's really important because in order to attract additional state and federal funds into Contra Costa County, we have to have this local revenue source to be able to do that, because most of the state and federal funding is competitive and it requires us to bring money to the table to be able to attract those dollars in the Contra Costa County. So it's really critical as we look towards the future that we have these local revenues to continue to build and improve the transportation system here in Contra Costa County. That's a 30-second commercial there, Jared.
Well, and as you talk about those local funds to fix the potholes and stuff, I should share with the audience, as a volunteer, I am chair of the CCTA Citizen Advisory Committee, where local cities have to report the use of their funds to us as an oversight function. And we have some other community input and stakeholder engagement stuff that we weigh in on. But that's one of our big things, is receiving those reports and approving them for people.
Yeah. And Jared, just so everyone knows, for your audience, CCTA, we have our own podcast. It's called On the Patio Podcast. And we're going to have a future episode featuring Jared as the chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee. And we're going to do a deeper dive into that. And we're going to talk about what does it mean to have that oversight, as well as making sure the public stays involved with what CCTA is doing on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I'm excited about that. And one of the questions I actually ask every streets planner that comes before us, community development director, I ask if on the regional routes of significance, are they talking to the other cities along those routes to coordinate traffic lights and move traffic together? And usually I'd say 8 out of 10 times I get a speechless answer. Why would I talk to another city about this? And I don't know if it's happening yet. So we're going to see the results at the end of the year. But I'd say within the next 6 months, I want CCTA to broker a meeting with you to talk about that. And I know CCTA is doing a traffic signal coordination effort to fund that. So can you talk a little bit more about that and how CCTA can work with cities to coordinate those signals on those regional routes?
Yeah, Jared, that's a great question. And it actually ties in to your original question about housing needs and the growth in Contra Costa County. So in Contra Costa County, there's 19 cities, right? Plus the actual county. CCTA is an independent agency, standalone agency from the county. And so what's important is that because of the way that funding has flowed, I'll say over the last 35 years, in some ways we have kind of created organically these silos, right? And in my opinion, I think that's where the future of transportation is really going to go, is how can we build a better connected transportation system, right? Because you're right. All these roads just don't stop at city boundaries, right? And transit doesn't stop at city boundaries. And so what we need to do is look at these large arterials, right? Pleasant Hill Road, San Pablo Avenue, Bollinger Canyon, Nashua Valley Road, Sand Creek, all these roads that go through multiple cities. And historically, the cities have operated these roadways somewhat independently within their jurisdictions. And I see where CCTA is going to play a bigger role is stepping in and kind of asserting ourselves into these corridors to help and assist the local jurisdictions to manage these corridors more seamlessly, right? Like, for example, like Ignacio Valley Road right now, and I'm sure if you drive in Ignacio Valley Road in the morning, basically Oak Grove gets used as a meter, right? So you got all these people backed up on Oak Grove all the way back, basically being able to control traffic flow all the way down to the corridor to the freeway. Well, could you synchronize the signals and coordinate the traffic across the entire corridor, across all the intersections, rather than just doing it at one intersection, right? And so that is our smart signal system project that you're referring to. Is we just programmed about $45 million to upgrade and improve about 350 intersections in Contra Costa County to be able to coordinate that. And this is getting a little bit technical, but right now all the cities are either on different traffic controllers or on different systems or on legacy systems that can't communicate to other systems. And so our first job is to really improve the infrastructure, number one, so that way we can get those systems to communicate together and be able to, with this smart signal program, we would look at how to obviously improve traffic flow, but also in terms of like future transportation, how do we prioritize vehicles in these corridors, right? How can we prioritize transit? How can we do a better job of prioritizing emergency service providers? How do we make these intersections smarter so that way people can walk and bike safely within these intersections, but also be able to detect where near misses are, right? So be able to understand where are these potential incidents happening so we can take a proactive approach to managing the systems and improving these intersections. And then also looking at how we can prepare these arterials for the future, like connected and autonomous vehicles, and being able to have cameras and wireless communication systems to be able to talk and communicate with the future fleets of like a Tesla, for example. And so looking at how we can prepare these corridors for the future is also a huge strategy for the Smart Signal program. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer to your question, but that's one element of kind of where we're going with the future of transportation.
Well, that's what this is about, right? Talking about that. So I like the concept. It's called V2X, right? Which is vehicle to grid or vehicle to anything in the smart city world. So it's putting 5G phones and 5G cars like Teslas or others communicating to the signals that are out there. And that's where we need to go to help speed up traffic along those routes.
Yeah. And this is nothing new to Contra Costa County. CCTA and Contra Costa County has always led in this space of innovation. And for example, in the city of Walnut Creek, there was a demonstration with Audis where if you owned an Audi, you would be able to drive through Ignacio Valley Boulevard and you would be able to see the signal phase and timing directly in your dashboard. You would have a green, a yellow, and a red. And so as you're driving, you would know when the intersection is going to turn in advance of the intersection, right? And so having that type of information, that type of technology makes our roads safer, right? That's the whole purpose of, I think, the technology is to make our roads safer. And I think, in my opinion, we should not be complacent in terms of the number of fatalities that occur in our roadway system, which is about 45,000 people per year. And so
in Contra Costa?
No, in the country. Sorry. That was a good clarification. 45,000 people per year die in our roadway systems across the country, right? And 94% of that is because of human error, right? So if we can use technology like connected and autonomous vehicles, we can make our roadways safer. And so in this innovation space, we saw the future, we saw this was coming. And back in 2014, we created one of the largest autonomous vehicle testing facilities in the country, right here in Contra Costa County, right here in the city of Concord at the former Concord Naval Weapons Station. And so we're using that facility, understanding there's this whole development thing happening with the city and so forth. But since then, we've been using it as a testing facility. All the major OEMs from Silicon Valley, and OEMs are original equipment manufacturers. So that's like Ford, Toyota, all the automotive manufacturers. But all the Silicon Valley auto manufacturers test at GoMentum Station. And I can't say who because we want to protect everyone's privacy. But what that does is really give CCTA a front row seat to the future. We understand where the private sector is going and how to prepare our infrastructure for the future. And we also get to address certain challenges here in Contra Costa County with technologies. For example, we have a smart signal lab at GoMentum Station. And so we've been able to test the latest and greatest smart signal technology that we can then bring out and apply to our local roadway system. Another example is first and last miles. In Contra Costa County, we have a huge first and last mile problem. So it's very hard for someone to get around within those short trips, like 2-mile trips. You're either going to be biking or walking or driving, quite frankly. And so it's super convenient for someone to get in their car and drive down to downtown Pleasant Hill, right? Or downtown Walnut Creek. Well, if you had a more convenient first and last mile option that picks you up from your doorstep, takes you to the downtown area, the grocery store, to the BART station, to the transit center, that's called first and last mile. And so CCTA, we've been testing what we call a shared autonomous vehicle to help solve that problem. And we were the very first agency in the country to import one of these vehicles in 2016, and it was called an Easy Mile shuttle. And so we were the first agency in the state of California to test that vehicle on public roads. And we've been continuing to test it. And now we're actually operating a shared autonomous vehicle in Bishop Ranch down in the city of San Ramon. And it's open and available and free to the public. So you can go down there Monday through Friday, all day long, and go ride the shuttle and experience kind of what the future of transportation is. And we're going to continue to expand those vehicles to places like Rossmore, right? Senior community centers where these shuttles can get people around within this senior community. So that way they continue their quality of life. So they have access to transportation and they can get to the community center. They can get to bingo. They can get to the grocery store, right? And May Mobility, our partner, May Mobility, just made a press release announcement yesterday of working with us on the county hospital project, where we're providing a wheelchair accessible autonomous vehicle to provide access to the county regional medical facilities in the city of Martinez. And we're using these technologies for very specific use cases. And is the technology perfect? It's not completely perfect, I'll be honest with you. But I think if you find the right use case and the right application for the technology, it will be successful. And so I think that's what's really important. And that's what we do at GoMentum Station. We test the technology, we validate the technology, we understand what it can and cannot do, and then we roll it out to public roads in very specific and safe use cases, because safety is our number one priority. And so I think that's kind of the future of transportation, is how do we connect people better using these new technologies, making transportation more multimodal.
I think that's great. And since you just ended that statement with multimodal, let's talk about how you factor in bike transit and scooter transit and e-bikes into future planning.
Yeah, they're right now, and this is a good kind of opportunity for the public and everyone to kind of get involved with planning the future of transportation, because right now we're doing a complete wholesale change update to our countywide transportation plan. And our countywide transportation plan is really setting the foundation for where we want to go with transportation, right? As growth continues in Contra Costa County, as housing continues to grow in Contra Costa County, our local roads and our highways are going to continue to get congested. So what are we doing about that? How are we going to address that? And I think it really comes down to really thinking outside the box, getting creative, right? As you think about these large arterials, how can we actively manage these systems better? But then, like I mentioned, prioritize. It might mean that we're prioritizing a bus during certain times of the day. It might mean that we're potentially looking at how to provide access through a network of share mobility hubs, right? And so I think share mobility hubs are really the key to getting people potentially out of their cars. And we're not saying out of their car every single day, all the time, but just provide people options, right? That's what we want to do. We just recently did a travel behavior study that has given us some insights into what people are looking for. And out of everyone driving, people are tired of driving in congestion. People are tired of driving their car. They are looking for options, or they are looking for alternatives, but they feel like there's no good alternatives, right? And so I think that's what we're kind of looking for towards the future. How do we make the system more integrated with transit and other modes of transportation? For example, today we have a workshop to talk about our integrated transit plan. And we're working with our transit operators to look at how we can make transit better connected, more reliable, more efficient, and more accessible. And looking at that network of how do we have more of these, like, I'll say trunk lines, right, of transit? And then how do we get people to those trunk lines more efficiently through things like first and last mile options, like shared autonomous vehicles, or other types of shuttles, or these share mobility hubs. And the share mobility hubs, I'm envisioning that they would be essentially kind of spaced out every half mile, and kind of think about it as a bus stop on steroids, really. And you've got scooters, bike share, car share, shuttles, all those things in terms of what we call micro transit, micro mobility, to be able to get to where they need to go, either, like I said, to a downtown area or to get direct access to transit. And that's all kind of integrated into a mobile platform. So that's the real customer interface that we're seeing in the future, is having a mobile platform, kind of like a Google app or Google Maps on steroids, where it's a multimodal journey planner where you will be able to see and access all these different modes of transportation and be able to reserve, schedule, as well as receive incentives for taking alternative modes on a given day or a given time. And so we want to make sure the system is easy to use, it's convenient, and it's accessible. And that's what we want to provide through this mobile app.
That's great. And it just goes into this conversation about how CCTA and Contra Costa is just leading in innovation, bringing all of those in. One of those innovation concepts is also congestion pricing. You see a fast track lane on 680, but we also are looking at other areas for that. Can you go into defining what congestion pricing is and how it's used as a tool?
Yeah, so I will say that CCTA specifically, we are not necessarily looking at congestion pricing at this time, but I will say that it is being looked at from a regional perspective. We have a regional agency that kind of oversees the funding for the 9 Bay Area counties, right? And that agency is called Metropolitan Transportation Commission. And there is an effort ongoing right now looking at how does congestion pricing look regionally in the 9 Bay Area counties. And so what is congestion pricing? Well, our transportation revenue models, our primary revenue source is gas tax, right? And so that's state funding. And as we continue to move to zero emission vehicles, then that revenue source is going to continue to decline, right? So how do you change the transportation revenue model when you've got this shift in terms of how the fleet is going to evolve? So that's potentially how congestion pricing comes into play, is making sure everyone continues to pay for their use of the transportation system. And there's other models out there. There's road user charging, there's congestion pricing. There's a lot of different models that are being looked at both at the state level and also at the regional level. And so congestion pricing is very tricky because when do you apply it, right? When do you apply it? When do you use it, if at all? How does it kind of fit into all these existing funding sources, right? So people are already paying for sales tax for transportation. They're paying tolls on bridges. They're paying tolls on the express lanes. Like there's multiple avenues where people are paying to use the transportation system. So how does it fit within that model, right? As we look at it today. And it's really tricky because if you toll all the lanes, I think there's going to be one, a lot of upset people. And two, there's a big equity question there because not everyone can afford to be able to use the transportation system. And so there's some huge equity questions in terms of how is this going to work? And also, if you apply congestion pricing, you need to have alternatives, right? So I think a big component of congestion pricing is making sure you've got alternatives for people to take if they can't afford to use the transportation system. And so that's a big lift because the big alternative would be transit. And so how are we going to modify and build a transit system that's reliable enough and accessible enough to be able to have as an alternative to be able to apply congestion pricing? And I think that it's a really kind of tricky proposition that needs to be really further evaluated. And I think, like I said, MTC as well as the state are both looking at those. I know even in Southern California, LA County is also looking at congestion pricing, but I think congestion pricing is mainly going to be really looked at in these more large metropolitan areas. I think the area that's the most furthest along is actually New York City just approved a congestion pricing plan earlier this year to move to how to apply it in essentially in the city as a zone. And so we're all kind of looking at that one to see how is it going to work? How is it going to be implemented? And like I said, congestion pricing is a real tricky proposition.
That's a great answer. Let's talk about transportation taxes, right? Because you talked about we're moving to a zero emission vehicle. So nobody's buying gas. Maybe 2035, it'll definitely start reducing as no car in California will be allowed to be sold that takes gas anymore. 2045, 2050, you're cycling out entire fleets, people that do have gas vehicles by that point. So it's going to seriously impact your funding. We've seen funding needed for BART, funding needed for transit agencies. We've talked about bridge toll increases, MTC putting a regional ballot measure on for transit. And then CCTA has potentially a ballot measure coming up in the next 10 years. Just talk about a little bit of funding, ballot measures, what people should know. Inform us.
Well, there's a lot of things happening right now. That's a tough question, but I think I'll put it this way. I think people are really fatigued on taxes and transportation revenues. And we all, as transportation professional, we all recognize that. And I think the first thing we need to do, this is my opinion, is we need to understand better where all the existing funding is going, right? I think we need to hold ourselves accountable in terms of where this funding is going. And I was giving a presentation to a group a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about this in terms of before you put another ballot on the measure, how are you going to show me that this is going to make an improvement? And I think that really comes down to being obviously transparent, but also having good data and being able to share that data. And I think that's something that we all have that data, but I think it's a matter of using that data to be able to demonstrate that the work that we've been doing for the last, especially with Measure J, we have been doing good work with Measure J. In fact, Contra Costa Transportation Authority, we were actually given an award for good governance by the Contra Costa County Taxpayers Association. And so I think something to know about CCTA is that we're only 20 people. We are a high performing agency. We operate this agency, as Jared is, almost like a private consulting firm. Like we hold ourselves accountable every single day. And I think that's what people are looking for. They're looking for government to be more efficient, more accountable, and And I think once people understand that there's good governance, I think that's what's going to take to really help people understand that, okay, my money's going to good places. Yeah, maybe I can, vote yes on another measure. But to your point, there is a lot of moving parts right now in terms of a regional housing measure in 2024, regional transportation measure in 2026, which quite frankly is there to address the transit fiscal cliff that's coming. And I think a lot of people, the general public, a lot of people don't even understand that there is a transit fiscal cliff that's coming. But I think, and that transit fiscal cliff is important because transit is important for everyone, and especially for those that really need to use it. Like for example, the yellow line, the BART line that comes from San Francisco all the way to Antioch, it's the highest productive line in the Bay Area. Like people use BART in Contra Costa County. And so if BART, like right now, BART has a tremendous fiscal cliff, and that's because their revenues are down, their fare box is down. Right now, I think they're right around 45% pre-pandemic revenue levels, whereas before they were depending on 75% fare box return. That 30% of revenue is gone. It's missing, right? And luckily, the federal government stepped in and was able to provide, I'll call it gap funding. Just recently, the state jumped in and tried to provide some gap funding out for the next 4 years. But this is really about transit doing two things, in my opinion. One is getting creative and figuring out how to become more efficient and quite frankly, in some ways more accountable. And then two, what is that money going to do to improve the transportation system? And what's the value proposition? Why should I take transit, right? What's the value proposition? I think that's what people are looking for, is they're looking for the why of why are we doing this? And so I think that's a big part of the regional measure in 26. I will say locally here in Contra Costa County, the board of CCTA, which is comprised of about 14 elected officials, will be discussing and looking at potentially when we will be renewing Measure J, because it does sunset in 2034. So we may go out for a measure in 2028, 2032. I don't know. We have to have that discussion to be able to continue those revenues. And those revenues are important because without Measure J, everyone's commute in Measure J would be anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes longer in Contra Costa County without Measure J, which is significant, right? That's significant. And I don't think people realize that there's an agency like CTA with this local revenue source that is your transportation agency. We are focused on this every single day, trying to bring benefit to Contra Costans, and we're leveraging every local sales tax dollar that we possibly can to provide the most benefit. And like I said, without that local dollar, everyone's commute. Could you imagine if we never built the Fort Ord, the Caldecott Tunnel? What's 24?
I'd be sitting there from last Friday.
Yeah. Could you imagine if we never widened Highway 4 from 2 lanes to 6 lanes? Like, it would be a mess still, right? It would still be considered the most dangerous highway in the country. And Measure J has brought in these really important improvements into Contra Costa County. And we've done it very well and very efficiently. Like I said, we're only 20 people here at CCTA. But the regional funding looking forward, and as we talked about congestion pricing, it's a real tricky proposition in terms of how do we deal with these new revenue models, because there is a need for additional funding. I'm not going to lie. There's not enough funding to address all of the needs, transportation needs in the Bay Area and in Contra Costa County. And so it really comes down to, how are we going to use those funds? And in my opinion, we need to make more performance-based decisions, right? And we can't do everything. And so what are the specific projects that are going to provide the most bang for your buck, right? Like getting into that whole conversation of return on investment, like manage the dollars and look at these projects as if I was a private investor, right? And how are we looking at our return on investment, and is it going to provide the most benefit?
And as we wrap up here, I really want to highlight for our audience CCTA is really leading the country in innovation. They are at the forefront of bringing in technology, experimenting with new things. And the GoMentum facility out in Concord, like Tim said, it is the largest test track of autonomous vehicles anywhere in the country. And a lot of the big auto manufacturers are there. A lot of technology companies are there and partnering right here in the middle of our county doing things. So I really want to point that out. I think that's really worth that. And thank the CTA for your leadership. And to check out Tim, like he said, on the Patio podcast, where you're listening to this, check that out. It's all transportation focused, touching on everything from waterways, ferries, and how that's improving Contra Costa, which doesn't really touch the bay in a lot of places, to senior travel and how seniors can get around, particularly that first and last mile as well. Tim, any closing thoughts?
Well, I just want to comment on what you just said. And people might ask, why are we doing GoMentum Station? And I think one is, I already mentioned it, gives us the front row seat to the future. But two, it provides new economic development and job opportunities. And generally, Contra Costa County, we are a bedroom community. People live here, but there's not a lot of jobs here, right? People go to San Francisco. Now, obviously, that's kind of changed now with the pandemic with people working from home. But generally, why we created GoMentum Station is to bring high-paying, smart, technical jobs to Contra Costa County. And we're seeing that now. With our partners at GoMentum Station, they are living and working here in Contra Costa County, and we're seeing the benefits of that. And so that's one of the reasons why why the board wanted to create GoMentum Station. And transportation is an important element, to that as we kind of look towards the future. But really appreciate the opportunity, Jared. This has been a great conversation. Look forward to maybe having another conversation. There's a lot to unpack about transportation in Contra Costa County. And I know we kind of burned through about 40 minutes here already, but I look forward to our podcast together on the patio to kind of do a more deeper dive and continue the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate it. Please hit subscribe today so you get the weekly updates of when we release the next episode. And in October, where this will air, we are giving away a $25 Amazon gift card to somebody that leaves us a 5-star review and leave the comments, whether it's on iTunes, Spotify, or Amazon. Thank you for doing that for us. I appreciate it. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Capstone Government Affairs and Economic Development, a firm where I serve as managing partner. For more information, check us out at www.capstonegov.com and follow us on LinkedIn by typing in Capstone Government. Thank you for listening to today's show. Check out the show notes, and for a full transcript, visit our website, www.capstonegov.com, and follow us on LinkedIn by typing in Capstone Government, or you can find me, your host, Jared Ash.